All right. Welcome back. Welcome to second semester. Welcome to 2020, and welcome to the new way we're going to do notes. It's going to be pretty much the same. I'm going to say things, and you're going to write them down, and then at the end of the unit, you'll turn in your notes for credit, and you'll have them be used on the final. But I'm going to do it online mostly now for several reasons. One of the big things is that if you're still writing and I move on, you can just pause me and you will no more frustrating, trying to catch up and write fast and things like that. So pause it anytime, and I will try to warn you at the end of each slide when we're going to be going to a new one, so you can pause it and continue writing. Now, none of the stuff on the screen right now you need to write down. You won't need to write stuff down until we actually get into the section notes. Today we're doing section 1 of Marching Towards War. We're going to be talking about World War I, which they called the Great War, because it would seem kind of pessimistic to call it World War I when there hadn't been any others. We don't call it World War I until we have World War II, which we'll also do this semester. We're going to do all 4 sections of this chapter, basically how we get to the war, what the war is like, why it's so horrible for the people involved, how it involves the whole planet, and then how, when they end it, they don't really settle many of the issues that they had at the beginning, and so the ending of World War I almost guarantees the beginning of World War II. All right, so these are the 4 sections. Okay, and we're going to do Marching Towards War today. All right, Marching Towards War. Now is the time when you want to get something to write with. Okay, Marching Towards War. Military buildup, nationalistic feelings, and rival alliances set the stage for a continental war. We'll talk about all of those individually. Okay, and we're going to do an easy worksheet, either end of class today or beginning class tomorrow, that covers all those in a cool acronym called MAIN: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Okay, basically like a recipe for a terrible war. So what's happening in Europe at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s? Well, it's becoming a tense place. Okay, think of everything that we saw happen last semester. We had the rise of industrialization. We have modern technology, modern weapons. We have imperialism. Okay, we have new nations. Germany and Italy are new nations that are trying to work their way into the balance of power in Europe. And so this thing that really started under Napoleon called nationalism continues. Okay, nationalism takes 2 forms. Either it's yay, my country's the best, and I'm going to prove it by having a bigger military and more territories and a bigger empire than your country. Or the other form of nationalism is, hey, we got a whole bunch of people who speak the same language, have the same cultures, but we're being forced to live in some larger empire or state that doesn't recognize our uniqueness, and so we want our own country. So you got those 2 types of nationalism rising in Europe at this time. Now, Europe is still peaceful and very prosperous in the late 1800s. This is really when Europe is at its height of world power. 1 in every 4 people on the face of the planet back then was a European. It's nowhere close to that now, as you probably know. But Europe was by far at its most important point in world history. And so they are enjoying prosperity. And again, they've had peace essentially since the Congress of Vienna back in 1815 when they settled all that Napoleonic business. But the nations want to compete, especially the new nations. They're new. They want to show that they've got what it takes. And so Germany and Italy want to compete with the traditional nations like France and Great Britain to show that they are powers. Okay, and we talked about that when we did imperialism. We're going to get to the point where nations are taking over places just to say they have them when it makes no economic sense at all. So that's one way that this nationalist competition happens. Another way that it happens is much closer to Europe, okay, in a place called the Balkans. Now, the Balkans is filled with small ethnic groups who don't want to be ruled by outsiders. They want to rule themselves in a nation or some kind of state where they can be in charge of their own education, their own religion, all of that. They don't like it being imported on them from the outside. And that's really where things are going to blow up. And we'll get to that in a minute. All right. So imperialism and militarism. Well, imperialism, you should know, right? We ended with that last semester. And that's basically nations competing for colonies where? Africa and Asia. And essentially, initially, it's for resources, right? They wanted to extract raw materials and then sell finished goods to the people in these colonies. But eventually, they just start taking over places to have their flag on as much territory as possible, and so it becomes really unproductive by the end of the period. Now, here's a word you might not know: animosity. Okay, animosity is hostile feelings towards someone. Okay, it's not hatred, but it's you don't trust them, and you're not sure what they're going to do, and so you want to make sure that they know not to mess with you. And so that's going to lead to an arms race. An arms race is essentially who can have the biggest military. And then if you have a big military, you want to glorify it. You need to have the people think the military is important because you're spending a tremendous amount of money on it. And that's called militarism. Okay, that's big parades, having lots of military uniforms and people, even if they're not in the military, basically organizing your society around the military and glorifying it, saying, hey, this is a symbol of our nation or our empire. Any right-thinking young man would want to be part of our military. And it perpetuates, which means continues, the growth of the military and the growth of spending on the military. So by the time we get to 1900, we've got these European powers. They're all nervous about each other, and they all have really big militaries, in part because they're scared and want to be able to defend themselves. And so one of the things they decide to do when they're scared is they decide they want to make some friends. Okay, and we'll talk about that in just a second. I'm about to switch slides, so if you're not done with these points yet, go ahead and hit pause and join us on the other side. But here we go. So they're going to make friends or allies. And take a quick break for water here. So it should be just like the regular notes. Well, alliances. Who's going to be my friends? If a fight happens, who do I know I can count on against the other people? Well, the king of alliances was a guy named Otto von Bismarck. And here's a picture of him. Now, he was a genuine badass. I mean, just look at that mustache. He was appointed to be the head of government by the King of Prussia, Wilhelm I, back in the 1800s, when Wilhelm wanted to make a united country called Germany and wanted to do it his way, and he hired Bismarck to do all of that. And Bismarck actually started a series of carefully planned wars that allowed Germany to become a new and powerful nation. Once he had achieved nationhood for Germany, he said, okay, that's it. We're done. Now we need to protect what we've got. And so he formed alliances and pacts with other European countries, basically to try to protect Germany against their biggest enemy and the country that had suffered the most by Germany uniting, and that was France. Okay. So here he is, Otto von Bismarck. So 1871, the German Empire is declared, and then Bismarck, having gotten what he wanted through war, doesn't want any more war. He wants peace. And the main thing, like I said, is he is worried that France is going to want revenge because they got absolutely worked in the Franco-Prussian War from 1870 to 1871. It only lasted 6 weeks. Okay, and when a war is that short, that means one side really outmaneuvered the other. And so the French lost a lot of territory. Their pride is very hurt. And they're still the biggest, most populous, richest country in Europe, but they've been embarrassed by this new country, Germany. And Bismarck knows at some point the French are going to want payback for that. And so what he decides to do is make a series of alliances which will isolate France. Now, there are 5 great powers. Bismarck's goal is to always have Germany on the side of 3 versus France and one other, so 3 versus 2. And so they form alliances. He signs a treaty with Russia in 1881, and then he forms the Triple Alliance with Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy in 1882. All right, so that's 3 versus 2, which is France and Britain. Okay, so 5 great powers are Germany, Austria, Hungary, France, Great Britain, and Russia. All right, and so Bismarck always wants Germany and 2 others facing France and 1 other, so that he won't have another war with France. these alliances are going to change. All of this is going to change when Wilhelm I dies and his son, Wilhelm II, becomes the German emperor. And this is in 1888. And he wants to change foreign policy. He likes the sound of having colonies for Germany. Bismarck thought colonies were a distraction and a waste of money to go conquer other people. You should work on the politics where you live. But Wilhelm II, his cousins, as we'll talk about this whole thing being a family affair, his cousins in Britain were getting all of these colonies around the world, and he had FOMO. So he begins a policy of adding colonies, and he also decides to get rid of the old man, Bismarck. And Bismarck is sent into retirement, and Wilhelm II puts Germany on a reckless course of expanding its empire and making its friends and potential enemies very nervous. First, he lets the alliance with Russia that Bismarck had worked out, he lets that lapse, which means end or not, he lets it expire basically. And so now the biggest country in the world is no longer allied with Germany. And guess who they decide they want to be friends with? They make an alliance with France, which is the nightmare Bismarck warned about for Germany, because Russia's on one side of Germany and France is on the other. So as we're going to see, Germany is stuck in between the two powers, and that's going to be a very fateful decision. He also, having spent summers in England with his cousins, he loves the Navy. He envies the British Navy, and he wants Germany to have a Navy as great as Britain's. And so he greatly increases the size of the German Navy, very powerful battleships called dreadnoughts. He builds more ports, and this makes Britain nervous. Britain always wants to have the biggest navy because they have the biggest empire around the world. And so he now has antagonized or created animosity, there's that word again, with Britain, who used to be friendly with Germany. So now he's made relations worse with Russia and Britain. And so Britain and France and Russia form yet another alliance called the Triple Entente in 1907. And Entente is a French word. It means understanding. It's not a formal alliance, but it's saying, look, if Germany causes any trouble, we're going to all unite together to stop Germany. So now it's really gotten out of hand. In just a few short years, Germany is almost alone against 3 of the 5 powers. And this is where we're at when things happen in the Balkans. I told you we were going to get back to the Balkans. Okay, so we're going to look at the Balkans now. If you're still working on this slide, go ahead and pause me. And we'll see you on the other side when we get to essentially a small little crisis turns into the biggest war the world has ever seen. Okay, the Balkans. It's a region most of us will never go to, and we don't know much about. I mean, us as 21st century Americans, but it's a very strategically important part of the world. It's where Europe and Asia come together. Okay? And it's a restless region. Okay? Restless meaning they're not comfortable, they're not happy, they want change. Okay? Like I said a little while ago, many groups in the Balkans want independence, and they win their independence in the early 1900s. Independence from who? Well, I'm going to quickly look at a map, and don't worry, the words are going to come back in just a minute, but I'm going to show you this map. Okay, so here we have the Ottoman Empire. All right, that's modern-day Turkey, a country we're still having difficulties with, even though they're technically our ally. But the Ottoman Empire had controlled all of this territory. And to give you a sort of signpost, here's Russia, here's Austria, here's Italy, Germany's up over here, all right? And the Ottomans, which is a Muslim empire that had been ruling this area for centuries, their empire is slowly breaking up and losing power from inside. And so it's going to retreat, it's going to shrink, and every time it shrinks, the people that used to be in the empire want to have their own country. Okay, so the most powerful nation to come out of the Balkans is the country of Serbia. Okay, and I'm going to go back to the map, but don't worry, we'll go back to the words. So here's Serbia in blue, and the Ottomans leave, and the Serbians form their own nation. The next territory to get independence is a place, it's two places, but we lump them together, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Right? You don't worry, there will not be a spelling portion on the test. This region, like Serbia, is Slavic. Okay, and like I said, being a Slav, not a Slav, a Slav, it's an ethnicity. Okay, and Serbia wants to be the main Slavic state in Europe, and it really feels that Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is smaller, should be added to it. Okay, if you go back and look at the map one last time, here's Bosnia and Herzegovina, this yellowy color, and Serbia feels that they should control them because there are many Slavic people in Bosnia. Austria feels that they should control them because there are many German people in Bosnia. And as you can see from the map, Austria-Hungary is much bigger, and so they annex or take. Annex is a fancy word for take, and it's going to be in your guided reading, so remember that. They take Bosnia and Herzegovina and make it part of their empire, which makes Serbia very mad. So Serbia is very unhappy, and the most unhappy Serb, the most outraged, who believes that his nation should rule all the Slavic peoples of Central Europe, is this guy, Gavrilo Princip. He's a very small, unassuming guy, but very proud of his country and very much wants it to expand, and very, very angry that the Austrians have taken Bosnia away. And so he joins what we'd call a terrorist group, and they have a cool name and everything, the Black Hand, and they desire through any means possible to free Bosnia from Austria and join it to Serbia. And so they'd call themselves Serbian nationalists. We'd call them terrorists because they're willing to kill and blow things up and hurt people to get what they want. And very much in that tradition, Gavrilo Princip is going to go to a city called Sarajevo, which is in Bosnia, where he's going to shoot and kill Franz Ferdinand. And I don't mean Franz Ferdinand, the Scottish supergroup of the early 2000s. I mean this guy, Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke and heir to the throne of the Austrian Empire. So here's the real Franz Ferdinand. Here, let's do that in a better color. Let's see, let's do yellow. So here's Franz Ferdinand. This is his wife, Sophia. Okay. And they're touring the city of Sarajevo to try and let the people of Bosnia know, hey, it's not going to be so bad being in the Austrian Empire. We're nice. We have modern technology and representative politics, and we keep the streets clean and, that type of stuff. And so he's having a parade, and basically he's pretty popular. A lot of people have come out to see him, and we see him and his wife, and this is a different carriage that they're in, but when they're in Sarajevo, they ride in an open car like this. And you'll study next year with President Kennedy and other world leaders, it's not a good idea to ride around in an open car. Because Gavrilo Princip comes up to the carriage, and instead of shaking hands like we see in this photo, Princip pulls out a gun and shoots the Archduke and his wife, both dead. Small caliber pistol, just a couple of shots, and unlikely scenario, it kills them. And now we bring in this fella. You can tell he's the grumpy old man of Europe. That's Franz Joseph. He's the current emperor of Austria-Hungary. Okay, this place. And he was going to, as you can tell, he wants to retire. He wants to essentially be able to go on to his reward and know that his empire will be in the hands of the Archduke, who was his nephew. The Archduke, Franz Ferdinand, who now has been killed by Gavrilo Princip. So, the emperor, Franz Joseph, is very angry, and he, for reasons we don't need to quite get into that much, he declares war on Serbia. because he knows that they're behind, or at least Serbian terrorists were behind the death of his nephew and his wife. And so Austria declares war on Serbia. This is in June 1914. And Russia then, which is also a Slavic country, it comes to the aid of Serbia. So this all happens. Think of one summer vacation, right? One summer break. We'll get out of here in June. Okay, so think of, summer just starts. It's June. We get a guy shooting another guy in a parade in Bosnia, and that leads to a war between Austria and Serbia, and in some form or another, Russia's going to come in. So we have three countries that are having some form of hostilities. That's in July. By mid-August, okay, before you would come back to school for the next year, the whole world is going to be at war. And so that's what we're going to look at starting tomorrow with Section 2. Now, pause here to finish up and then go and do your guided reading.